all good. All right, and we're recording. Excellent. So also in the name of Becky and myself, welcome everybody to this quite long security afternoon that we have planned. Yeah, so basically we came up with this because whenever we talked about security, we realized that every single time we're only touching certain subjects of security, certain specific things, we like pick it out and go over it, but there hasn't been really anything done yet in terms of a comprehensive and overview kind of talk about all the security that's behind Oracle Analytics. And so for the second episode of the Aces at Home, we thought, hey, what better possibility than to use this one? And let's jump right in. So since 2 days ago, it was Star Wars Day, another Star Wars quote here. With security, it's definitely coming back to Master Yoda. And well, you do security or you don't do security. You don't try. You don't come at the end of the project and say, oh, by the way, we should do some security. We should secure some things. We should actually make this compliant. Maybe you're in the banking sector and this could be an issue for you. So with this joke out of the way, let's quickly, my name is Christian. I'm an Oracle ACE director for analytics. I'm doing this since quite a long time. I'm presenting all over the world. Sometimes I can't be bothered to blog. Normally you find me on the Oracle forums or on Cloud Customer Connect, or basically 24/7s in our Telegram group, OBIEE Hackers, where we talk about pretty much anything related to data, analytics, ODI, and some other topics. Right, so Becky.
Good afternoon, good morning. I'm Becky Wagner. I have been in the analytics space since 2010. But I've been in IT much longer than that. I am the ODTUG Analytics Community Leader, and I'm on the board of directors there for ODTUG, which is a large user group that has a yearly conference case scope that we are very sad we weren't able to do in person this year. So we will be, and I'll show a slide here in a second, doing some learn at home style webinars. On top of that, I actually have a day job. I'm the managing director of analytics at US Analytics. I run the analytics team over there, and I'm still a full-time consultant. You can reach me on Twitter, LinkedIn, but mostly I hang out in the OBIEE Hackers chat channel, so catch me over there. One more slide. There you go.
Yep.
Like I said, I'm very heavily involved with the ODTUG community. We're very sad that we can't have Kscope or Kaleidoscope this year, so join us for half-day sessions for analytics. I believe ours is going to be on May 20th, but that can change between now and then.
All right, thank you so much, Becky. So, and since we both said we're ACEs or ACE directors respectively, just a word about the ACE program. If anyone in here hasn't heard about it, the ACE program is basically a community of, well, regular guys like you and me who
and
like
women
to share.
Just saying.
Sorry. I didn't want to exclude women. I just use guys
generically.
Yes,
I'm just totally messing with you.
Persons. Go ahead. Regular persons out there who like to share their knowledge and like to help the community. It's a very interesting program. If you want to be a part of it, you got all the information there. If you want to nominate someone, it's all there. And with that out of the way, let's go over to what we're going to talk about in these next roughly 2 hours. So we'll first set the more or less global context about, yes, so what are we going to talk about exactly and why? Because the why is most of the time easily as important as the how and what. So and then which areas and which products are we covering? Security concepts that actually exist in the tool. Then we branch out a little bit more specifically into IDCS, because as you will see in a moment, we will walk the line between cloud and on-premises quite a lot, because the lines are very blurry when it comes to Oracle Analytics. And then in the end, we're going to go into one specific topic very deeply, because it's one of the newer things that are happening and one of the more specific ones. And that's going to be using SSO and Active Directory with Oracle Analytics Cloud. Right, so context. Why is it actually important to talk about this? And the first two words that come into mind when talking about security, especially around Oracle Analytics, is vast and complex. And just for fun, the other day I typed this into Google, and if you search vast and complex, at least here where I'm based in Switzerland, literally the first thing that comes up in an image search is a diagram of the Large Hadron Collider of CERN in Geneva, which, if you've ever been to CERN or you read about CERN, it fits quite well the description of vast and complex, because the thing is bloody vast. It's huge, and it's pretty much the most complex machine on this planet that you can imagine. So it kind of fits. Now, if we take this and we say, okay, Oracle Analytics Cloud, vast and complex security, how does it look in terms of comparing it with competitors? And I'm not going to name names. I'm just going to say globally, how does this compare with other tools on the market that claim to do the same thing? And the choice that you have really when it comes to choosing a solution, or when it comes to building a solution with Oracle products versus competitor products is, do you want to do it easy way, or do you want to do it, what I say is a better way? Do you want to have few options on a high level, pretty much on-off switches with a very much departmental or user focus? All these things that have been happening over the last, let's say, 10 years. Or do you actually want to go into something that people sometimes claim has too many options, but we can control every single entity or object? I mean, how far down we go, you'll see in a while, and it does go down quite deeply. That is highly configurable. Literally, you can touch about 50,000 buttons, and every button does something else for your security. And then also, in terms of integration of the security, do you just stay in your departmental user focus, or do you want to say, well, we have a corporate focus, we actually include third parties in our supply chain, like suppliers or our customers if we deliver stuff, and obviously at the same time still keep departmental and user security? Now, this starts to sound quite like a bit, but why did we get to this point? And it has a lot to do with the historical growth of the product. And I'm mentioning quite a bit about the history also in other places, so you get the reason why. And believe me, these people, these three companies that have worked on the product so far, they thought about what they're doing very specifically. It all started with NQuire back in 1997, when they wrote the Siebel, the NQuire Analytics core engines, which was then bought by Siebel, and Siebel then bought by Oracle. And NQuire in the beginning, so just listing what they basically made. So the core BI server, presentation server, administration tool, that was all there in the beginning. And we're really talking about something that's last millennium. It's not just last decade, it's in the last millennium that this was invented, and we're still using the core of it. Some people may say, oh, it's outdated technology. It doesn't actually do it for me because I want something that's new, that's fancy, that's, well, counter question. If we're doing things correctly since 20+ years, and we don't even need to talk about them anymore because they're just so blindingly obvious, I prefer that to a newfangled company that comes around and says, oh, we're doing this, we're doing that. And you're like, that's not even a topic anymore. We don't talk about that. Just don't use it as a marketing message. So, and there were a lot of things that they had in there also, like agents were already there. They had several of the APIs existing, etc., etc. And the important thing is, from day one, they built in security measures. Then Siebel came around, bought them in 2001. The sale was completed, and Siebel started adding stuff themselves. The main thing they added, because that's what they bought it for, was the marketing integration, which they required also catalog groups for. Then they started doing the action framework, where you can actually integrate your analytics into your corporate IT system and actually do stuff with the data, do stuff with the analytical results. And then they added new source extensions for new sources, and something that I haven't put there yet, but Siebel actually started this whole thing of analytics applications. The basically pre-built apps on top of what was Siebel CRM at that time. They started branching out into the Oracle ERP, where you can get pre-configured content into your analytics. Then the Oracle era came, and this is basically the largest, by far the largest era. And my points here don't even start to cover what Oracle has put in. So we got PI Publisher integration, which was one of the first things. A whole lot of things around APIs, so web services, MBeans, nowadays tons of REST APIs. And obviously the whole WebLogic integration, for whatever positive or negative reasons you might think of there, but it's a good backend that we quite like. Obviously Essbase and all the other Hyperion tools after that acquisition was completed around 2008. Scorecarding and strategy management, and then the further down you go in the list, the closer we get to 12c and what's now Oracle Analytics Server, and that is data visualization, data flows, data engineering, etc., etc. So Oracle did quite a lot in that era, and as you will see in a moment, depending on the era, they also added more security. And when we get down to more data visualization, data flows, they went more into the, let's say, departmental self-service and augmented analytics regions. In there, you will see a kind of drop in detailed security compared to what we have in the other parts, but we'll get to that in a moment. So I've named several names so far. I named Siebel Analytics, Oracle OBIEE, OAS, OAC. So what are we going to look at actually? So we're basically going to look at these three right now. Still the, let's say, mostly used product at the moment, Oracle Business Intelligence. And we're going to base it on 12.2.1.4, current release, with obviously points being made about if you're still on an older version, what can you expect, what can you not expect, or what you should look at. But the main one is 12.2.1.4. Now, for the new product lines, Oracle Analytics, we're going to look at OAC, Oracle Analytics Cloud 5.5, and Oracle Analytics Server 5.5 as well. 5.6 should be coming in a very short amount of time, but we don't have those features in the presentation yet because we're not allowed to talk about them. If you have any questions about that, you can put them in the Q&A as well, and we'll see as of which point in time we can cover them for you. Right, so as in the covered areas, there's a couple of things that we're gonna touch on in all these different products, and that is, first of all, the basic security concepts that underlie everything, and I mean everything in there. Every single tool. And I haven't included desktop, by the way, just in case anybody writes this in the Q&A or chat while I'm talking. I haven't covered data visualization desktop because data visualization desktop is, well, it's a desktop tool. You do have security, yes, but it doesn't really play into the topic of today. So again, if you have questions there, yes, we can answer them later on for you, but DVD or Oracle Analytics Desktop, as it's called now, OAD, is not covered for the moment. Then also, we're going to touch a topic that's very interesting because it has to do with corporate security versus application security. You can't really go into a large client nowadays and say, we're going to do with the security whatever we want, whatever our guys that are the customer of this decide they want. You have to work with what's there. You have to align things. You have to reuse things. You have to make sure that, again, compliance is being kept throughout the whole life cycle of your data, of your analytical solution. And it's a very important point. Then we're going to touch a little bit about backend versus front-end parts. So what's basically happening behind the scenes more structurally versus what's happening in the so-called front ends. And you'll see that I define front end a little bit different than most people. It's not just a GUI clicky thing. And in general, just for all these areas, you'll have details, details, details. So don't be scared. It will be quite overwhelming at some point, because we can take this very, very far. We have 2 hours here to go over it, but just if you look at the meme on the side, there's a lot of tools out there. And again, I wasn't nasty enough to put actually names on those, but they claim, oh yeah, we can actually secure data. Oh, we can secure data sources. We can secure tables. Great, we can do user-based stuff. Well, if you know anything about Oracle Analytics security, the term amateurs is still being quite nice. So let's start with the security concept. And let's start very simplified. So this black box is your analytical system. And especially if you're a business user, you like it black boxed. You don't want to have all these details. You don't want to know about all the different things that go on in detail down there. You don't. But you want them to exist so that someone who actually builds this, who actually prepares things for you, can use them so that you get the benefit from it. And in terms of Oracle Analytics security, we have quite a few concepts that are underlying this. So first one, most basic one, authentication. Then component access. We'll get into what that actually means in a second. Just want to paint the bigger picture here, because you have functional access, you have object level access, you have metadata level access, very important, and you have data level access. And you'll see that even those inside of them have very largely varying degrees of detail and varying impacts. So you can't just say, oh, we secure something, which means I add something to a where clause, or I don't give you access to one table. Well, look at this picture. I don't think that's sufficient. And what are we talking about in terms of principles, the security principles, the entity types that we have in there in terms of security roles and groups? So we have the user, we have groups, and we have application roles. And at the most basic level, you can say users can belong to groups, can belong to application roles, and groups and application roles can have recursive relationships. For that, we leave it at this because we will revisit that in several areas of the presentation. But these are the main 3 entities that you need to know. And spoiler alert, one of them stops existing as of the point where we get into the application world. Now, since I mentioned something earlier, and since we've seen many questions in these last months and years of people that are still on old versions, and what these webinars have also showed us is that certain versions are very hard to die. Catalog groups, they did exist once. They existed from Siebel Analytics 6 days up until the end of 10G. They were still kept in OBIEE 11 for backwards compatibility, actually only in certain 11Gs, not in all of them. I just realized they were kicked out in 11.117. So if you're still on one of the older 11G or even 10G versions, then you might still think this is something that's normal. No, it's only because you have an old version. These things are dead. They're gone. If you still have them, please upgrade as fast as possible. Because as I said, many people or most people are still on 12C at the moment, 12.214, I hope. But even that version is on its way out and being replaced by the new Oracle Analytics Server product line. So if you're on an even older one, please, please, please upgrade. So we can get rid of a lot of things that we're covering in there in the future. So to the concepts, as I said, we start with authentication. And authentication is basically just the question, okay, am I allowed through the door? Am I allowed to enter? And for these 3 products, if we look at it, basically there are 2 main entry points for authentication. OAS and OBIEE use WebLogic, the backend, and Oracle Analytics Cloud uses IDCS. So if you're an OAC already or thinking about going to OAC and you're wondering about IDCS, wait a bit. That's going to be picked up in about 30 minutes by Becky when we're coming to the part 2. I'm covering more the basics here and more the generic stuff that holds true for both areas. Now, how does authentication in general look like? Well, we got the WebLogic server, which has, first of all, its own embedded LDAP here shown on the side, or it gets what I call the corporate security world from outside, from an LDAP, from Active Directory, or literally from any database table you can access via JDBC, via an SQL statement. And what that basically gives us is our population of users that can come in from either side, and our population of groups. And here it's important, this is basically where we get these group concepts from something like your Active Directory predefined groups, your LDAP defined groups, or the groups that you have in your WebLogic LDAP. They then get turned into WebLogic principles. So they get mixed together. You lose the distinction between what's a user that's coming from the WebLogic LDAP versus a user that's coming from your outside LDAP, from a DB table, or from Active Directory. They just become principles for WebLogic for the whole enterprise. And that then only goes to the application world. So that means once we reach the application world, the actual analytical world, we don't have to care about who's coming from where or where does his actual security reside, his group memberships, etc. It all becomes one. So this level of abstraction is very important because, just to make this visual, this is how we separate the corporate world, the things that happen before we get to the analytical engine, from the actual application, from analytics, from OAC as well, as you will see when Becky then details this. Now, I said I'm handling backend and frontend a bit differently because for me, in terms of security, the backend is either WebLogic and Enterprise Manager for on-premises or IDCS for the cloud. And this gives us our basic security structure, our baseline. Who is who, who's in which groups, etc., etc. But then on the other side, we have the actual applications, and I count the whole bundle as the front end. I'm not saying BI presentation server is the front end, because BI presentation server is just a tiny little part of this, and of this, and of this. So in the applications, we actually productize the security. We do something with it. We make something out of it. We actually apply rules to objects, to entities, to data. So once the backend part is done, the front-end part can basically use it as it wants and doesn't have to care about it. I always call Oracle products, especially the analytics products, I call that Lego for adults, because that's how they're built. Reusable, prefabricated blocks that you can stick together any way you want. I don't go and take a blowtorch and melt my Lego block into a different form so that it fits, or I take a saw and cut it in two. That's not how Lego works, and that's not how Oracle Analytics works. The equivalent for using other tools would be, all right, I write SQL statements specifically to be secured for that and that users. And we don't want that. We want people to just use the stuff and not think about what's happening in the background. If somebody has to actually think about, okay, how do I want to secure this data? Then most of the time, yeah, you're just doing it wrong. You don't have well enough prepared baseline to be used by the tool. You want your people to do value-added stuff. And your front-end users, your business analysts, having to worry about security isn't actually adding value to anything. So next part after the authentication is what I call component access. And this is which parts of the platform am I allowed to use? Again, if you can compare this to any other existing tool, this might seem a bit ridiculous because, well, you're using the tool, so what? Well, no, because Oracle Analytics is huge, it's complex, and it has many, many tools with many, many components in there. And we have several places where we manage this. So we have Enterprise Manager with the application policies, and then the application administration inside of the actual OAS or OAC or OBIEE. And there's not one place to rule them all. And that's again for historical reasons, because NQuire and Siebel wrote things differently in Oracle. And so some things are in policy, some things are in the app administration. It's not a big deal. You just need to know there's not one place. Don't forget about the others. Most people that come from old versions, as I said, 10G, maybe even the early 11G versions, when you just have upgraded and you never did anything anymore since then, which is about 10 years ago, actually. People went to the application administration of OBIEE, so now OAS, and just clicked around there. Thing is, nowadays, or let's say on premises nowadays, it all happens in the application policies. The new stuff that comes all goes into the policies because it's Java policies. The old stuff still is in the application administration. Now, and here is the first time where we encounter the concept now of the application role. And that's a defining point that transforms our generic corporate security into an actual application security, into an applicative logic. And most of you will have seen the these roles already: BI service administrator, BI content author, etc., etc. And what's very important here is that these policies, they actually already tie the roles to specific permissions. And there's several ones that are in there. So for example, RPD management, who is allowed to manage the RPD, to develop on it? That's in a policy. S-base access, same place. BI publisher, because BI publisher is a Java application and not a C++ application like the NQuire core, it's in the policies. Data visualization, all the new stuff is in the policies. And Becky will just touch on those things when we come to IDCS again on a very, very high level. Now, this is which components can I access? Then we have to say which functions can I access. And this is more or less which buttons am I allowed to click, which knobs am I allowed to twist, which specific detailed things I am allowed to do in the different applications. And for functional access in OBI and OAS, we got, as I said, the administration part for privileges, for BI publisher, etc., etc. Because BI publisher, again, is one of those hybrids that sits in both worlds. It has component access and it has inside itself, again, functional access. Oracle Analytics Cloud, you have IDCS and the Oracle Analytics console. So slightly different. And the console is basically for the DV and data flow part of Oracle Analytics Cloud. I could have made a dotted line between Oracle Analytics Cloud and Oracle Analytics Server Administration, because if you're running, depending on your edition that you bought, if you're running the full enterprise Oracle Analytics Cloud, you also have all of this over here. So there isn't really any border between there. It's just it runs in the cloud and Oracle manages it instead of you run it and you manage it. So functional access is what we all know and love since a long time. There's about 160 odd privileges at the moment that control detailed access. Who is exactly allowed to do what inside of OBIEE, inside of OAS? And again, very important, we tie this to application roles and users. Remember when I said, spoiler alert, one of them is going to disappear? The group concept that comes from the corporate security world has disappeared. So yes, we can still tie things to users that may come from an LDAP or from an Active Directory, but the main part is application roles. So we're really inside of the analytical world. The reason why I say you may use users is because it's not a good idea. It's actually a very bad idea. If you start giving detail access, and here we're just talking about functions, we're not even talking about metadata or data yet. If we're talking about functions and you have to chase down every single distinct user to know what he or she has access to, you won't ever end. Yeah, sure, if you have 10 users, yeah, easy. But how many implementations out there have 10 users? The norm is not 10, the norm is hundreds, thousands, or for some of my clients, actually 10,000 plus users. Don't start managing things like that. It won't work. Trust me. And then in here, there's kind of a special case, and I like to be technically correct because that's the best kind of correct. Technically, if you go into manage privileges and you look at the subject area access, it's a hybrid between functional access and data access because it controls based on which subject areas, implicitly hence which data, am I allowed to build things? Am I allowed to build my analysis, my dashboards, my prompts, my DV projects, for example? So this is, again, one of those hybrid situations. And just as an overview, there's a very important bit in here. This is a slide that you can read at your leisure. The very important part is there's only two values here. It's deny and grant. There's no more fine-grained control. And the important thing here is deny is stronger than grant. So if you have two application roles, one of them denies you something and one of them grants you something, the deny wins. And implicit default is deny. Backstory as to why this is, if you think about the structure of OBIEE or OAS, you have the presentation server and you have the BI server. And the presentation server, what you use as a GUI, is not the only GUI that can access the BI server, which means it's kind of the last line of defense in terms of security, which is why you say, okay, this is our front. This is where we meet the enemy. Here, deny is stronger than grant. And you will see when I get to the BI server how this changes, and keep these things in mind. It will become very important. So object level access. We're done with the functions, we're done with the components. Objects. This is, again, something that's very, very specific in Oracle Analytics, because it touches on which part of my catalog of my projects in DV am I allowed to create, read, update, delete. And if you think about your own corporation, probably you have quite a large catalog. Most of the times it counted in thousands, if not tens of thousands of analytical objects, dashboards, analyses, prompts, etc., etc. And we need to secure this. We don't want to say for every single object, what is the rights that we give on this, like on a file system. But we want to be able to do this for whole areas of our catalog, for whole folder structures. And very important here as a side note, if you've ever worked with this in the previous version, so the OBIEE era, it's in a file system. It's actually in the database now. So it still behaves like a file system. The object level control that we have here, the read, open, traverse, etc., etc., is still handled like a file system, but it's stored in the database. But these are OAS screenshots, actually. Even though it's in a database, there is no difference for you. There is no difference in look and feel. You still can add your roles or users to a certain location, so a folder, to a certain object, etc., etc. What's always nice to keep in mind here, there are certain predefined groups of permissions that exist. So you don't have to go through every single thing that I detailed here, read, open, traverse, and click, 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 click until your fingers bleed. But you can just say, well, we can set modify rights, or we can set open rights on an object, be it a analysis or a folder, and the engine will actually treat that for you. So if you set open on an analysis, it means read and execute for an analysis. If you put that on a dashboard, it means open and execute on a dashboard. If you put it on a folder, like a structural entity, it means, well, I can actually traverse this and open it, or you can just say traverse. Again, think file system. I don't have to have the ability to click on every single folder in a file system to get to a file that's lying in there. I just need to have traverse rights. I can go through, if I get a direct link to an object that's lying 17 levels deep in, I will be able to open that thing. I don't have to open every single folder. Same thing here. And since we're still in the presentation server, just like with the functional access, the important thing is no access here wins. If you lock somebody out, a user or an application role, of a part of your catalog, that person or role is locked out. And I've added this because I actually had this very recently at a client who had a bit too permissive folder structures and folder rights for my own liking. And obviously it ended up with some business analysts kicking out the BI administrator role with deny or no access from whole parts of the catalog, which made it basically an unupgradable catalog because we couldn't test anything anymore. So watch out for this. Don't just give full control because it makes your life easier and I don't need to think about it. Yeah, give it maybe modify rights, not full control, because the difference between modify and full control is this one line, change permission. Don't let your people change permissions as they want. Or, well, we lost literally 2 days of the upgrade fixing that in the .atr files on the file system. So, and in other cases, write plus read open, it becomes write. So the more permissive wins. Then excursion into the Oracle Analytics world here. We have data visualization object level access. And here we get into the area that I mentioned before, where things become a bit more fuzzy and a bit less detailed than what we have in, let's say, legacy OBIEE. Because data visualization is laid out to be self-service, is laid out to be very fast, point and click, easy visual grammar, etc., etc. So the security isn't as baked in as in OBIEE frontend, and more oriented towards generic object level access like we have in these projects. You can assign users and roles to a project, the very top level object. You can't go in and secure specific things inside of that project differently. You can't say I have different canvases and I give rights on different canvases. A project's a project, period. So what you can do in a dashboard with dashboard pages and secure the pages differently, you can't do in a project. Then with data sets, and OAC or OAS data sets are another hybrid between kind of functional access, data access, and content, so data row level security access. The line gets blurred here. And with more things coming into DV, like data flows, the machine learning stuff, these lines will become more blurry, and we will see how Oracle handles this in unacceptable releases, how they will increase security, decrease security, reinvent security around these objects. So it's always interesting when a new release comes out because there's always something new in terms of security in there. It's good to go self-service. It's good to go for easy, fast access, etc., etc. But what they learn is the first thing actual users scream about, and not CIO level people who look at fancy, moving, colorful stuff, but rather people that actually have to, well, basically be responsible for the numbers that come out. And is this the data that we are allowed to show? Is this the data that we're allowed to pass on to somebody? Again, due diligence and security in banking environments is quite harsh. So that's what they're actually asking for. They don't ask for a 50th chart type. They ask for security. Right, leaving the pure GUI world, let's go to the metadata-level access. Let's go into the RPD. Let's get into our semantic model. And here again, I'm talking about all the products, OBIEE, OAC, OAS, because they all use this. So we have presentation layer access on here, and it's basically only read, read, write, no access, and default. That's the only thing you can set there. And here we're getting to the point where a read becomes stronger than a no access. And that comes back to what I said before. Don't forget that, yes, we may be using DV, yes, we may be using answers, but the BI server is actually a data source for any other tool that wants to access it, because most analytical tools out there aren't actually capable of producing, let alone handling, a proper semantic model. It's just query, 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 and if you want a 517th report, then you write a 517th query in most cases. So proper semantic models can be a source for other tools. You can put Power BI on top of the BI server. And I'm not talking the BI server, the tool you go to your analysis. No, it actually hits the presentation layer. It hits the prefabricated metadata models that you have. So since our answers, our DV is not the only front end, well, here we have to rather be a bit more permissive, so that other tools that aren't capable of the same fine-grained control can still read our stuff. And hence here the warning, this is the opposite of what the Oracle frontends, DV and answers do. They say deny is stronger than grant. Here, grant is stronger than deny. So, and in terms of default, when you look at default values, it's basically, if you are on a subject area, it's the same permission by default. That's the reason why this dot here is missing on the top row. The default is whatever has been granted to authenticated user, which could also be called anybody who's in. For all other objects, it means inherit from my parent. And you can literally secure any single object in there, meaning subject areas, tables, presentation levels and hierarchies, presentation columns, the hierarchy itself, you name it. And again, you can do it on roles and users. I wouldn't suggest going to user level because you'll just lose control over it. So this is metadata, structural information still. Now, data level access. And what most people think of when we talk about data level access, oh yeah, I'm creating filters in my analyses, or I'm creating filter prompts in my DV project. No, that is definitely not data level access control. That is pretty much what you do when you come from other tool sets. You control everything in the front end object, like on the highest level. Well, we have about 50 other possibilities to do this, because what data level access really is, in my opinion, and what it should be dynamic, baked into the solution, security based, meaning you don't have to write the query with a where clause. It should actually just be a product of whatever your security framework gives you. And it's rules, 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 rules. It's not code, 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 code. It's just rules. And for us in the Oracle Analytics world, it's pretty much all in the RPD. First of all, we got RPD data filters for application roles and users. And this is one of the most dynamic things you can build in, where whenever you're part of a certain application role, for example, you're in HR, but your application role is HR agent, not HR manager, meaning you have different filters that get applied to your queries. Nobody goes in and writes any front-end object. Oh, this is for front-end agents. That's the reason why I have to add, wait, on this attribute, I actually have to filter on that. And then I actually have to make sure that I'm not using the, let's say, salary. Yeah, I shouldn't show the salary. Well, salary, guess what? We would control it here. We would actually kick out the salary presentation column based on your application role. Yeah, but I can also say, well, you're an agent, filter out everything that's up to a certain level of hierarchy in the company, filter out everything that only belongs to your department, and departments can change. Again, we read this dynamically. It's like here for the products. The products aren't something that somebody has written in a query or that you have clicked together in your front end. If you go into your front end and you click something together that's your 3 products, yeah, that might suffice for your requirements for this month or the next 3 months. What if a new product line comes along? What if you move around? What if you get promoted? You have more products. Do you go in and change everything? No, we want this to be dynamic. We make the security dynamic. We make it based on data. We make it based on our structure. For the RPD data filters, it's really object-based. Again, we do not want to write code. We define something on a presentation level or on a business model level. We can say, always filter on my products. I don't build anything that includes products as a filter. I don't even have to click that in. As soon as the query fires, it gets added. So we can actually force the inclusion of filter dimensions, even if we don't use it in the front end. If I'm doing a customer analysis for my, let's say, insurance clients with the highest claim rate over the last couple of months, I don't include only a filter that says, give me only products that I'm responsible for. That should be done by the semantic model. If I'm in car insurance, I don't want people to be in my results list that have homeowner insurance, fire insurance, whatever insurance at our company. But I also don't want to go in and click that together every single time. So it has to be done automatically. Then obviously a couple of things that we can do there as well is temporal restrictions. When am I allowed to query? How much am I allowed to get back? Can I run direct database requests? So can I actually write logical SQL or physical SQL against the database? And especially with limitations on return rows, this is where the Excel mafia comes in and says, wow, we need more access. We need more access. We need the ability to return 5 million rows and export it to Excel. Yeah, this is where I tell them no. Then another data level access control that we have in the logical table source is this at the bottom where clause. And this is basically, again, something we can make dynamic based on session or repository variables, but this is absolutely inescapable. Whenever this logical table source is used for whatever application role or user, this will get appended to the where clause that will cut off the data stream. And this is the big difference. If I do something in an LTS, in a logical table source, it will get used by every single query. If I do it on an object dependent on users or application roles, then it only runs for those security principles. Huge difference. And just quickly, because we actually got this question in our OBIEE hackers chat before, I think tonight while we were all asleep, the question came from the States. Let's go back. This fragmentation content here. Why does this fragmentation content not allow session variables? I don't know whether she's in here. I haven't checked the participants list so far, but just to make this publicly available, this information. So fragmentation content is actually not something that's supposed to cut off the where clause. It's something that represents the physical structure and physical content of the data source that you're accessing. So it says, what does this logical table source contain? It doesn't say what should it fetch from it. What should it fetch from it? That comes from something like the where clause or from a business model filter that's tied to your application role, because that's actually tied to a person, your application role, your user, etc., etc. The fragmentation content is tied to the structural object of that logical table source. So that's quite a distinction. I hope I answered that question. She wasn't online when we talked about this just before, but I hope this is answered. Otherwise, contact us later on. Then we have a couple of physical options. And physical options are really mean in the physical layer of the RPD. For example, we have VPD, which is virtual private database, which is a concept inside of the Oracle database where Becky and me connect to the database, and the database for her looks completely different than for me, because VPD rewrites the queries inside of itself based on the access rules that are in the database. Then we have S-based filters. We have named user credentials. So basically, Becky logs in as Becky, I log in as Christian, and we have different results coming back. Now, these parts, we can use them, but they're completely outside of our control. So whatever happens in VPD, whatever happens in S-base, that is what the DBAs or the S-base admins define. We just use whatever's there. And then there's the last one. I really wanted to cut this off and then like put it on the side, because connection scripts, yes, they exist. Yes, you can actually write statements that execute on connect. So when a session on the database is opened, like control cursors or you set parameters or whatever. Problem is, yes, you can code. Please don't. This is extremely hidden. Figuring out what happens there is extremely painful, because most of the stuff that happens actually happens in the database and you can't actually see it in the query log. So somebody comes in, says, listen, I get wrong results. You look at the query log in Oracle Analytics and it doesn't tell you what happens because it's in the database. So for completeness sake, yes, this exists. For sanity's sake, no, don't use it. It's a very, 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 honestly, it's one of the worst ideas that it can do in the RPD. Straightforward. Now, data level access, how do these new components handle this, like data visualization, data flows, etc., etc. So again, they handle this a bit differently because the whole tool, DV, is built for a different purpose. It's much more limited, it's much more reduced in complexity and in richness of functionality, because the possibilities depend on the connection, on the data level, and most of the time connection type that you use. I put here, it should grow. And this is kind of a shout out to any Oracle person listening. Please grow this. We need more fine control in DV. We keep saying it. It's a hard sell, I know, because again, it's not GUI, fancy, clicky, moving, colorful stuff that executives like and get. But this is actually what people need. This is what makes a project successful, the ability to control things.
You can make it available by script, command line, we'll take it, whatever. Sorry.
Yeah, what, in OAC, in a cloud environment where you don't have access to 90% of the functionality?
You know, I digress. I take you off course.
Yeah.
Go back. You've got no time left.
Okay. So just for the data sets. Now, obviously, if I write the data set and it's an SQL query or a SQL query, however you want to pronounce this, please leave this religious discussion out. You can write it in the SQL. You can write a where clause there. But you have on that data set, you again have role-based access control. So at least the object you can control. What's inside of the object, you can't really, because again, you can then say it depends on the connection. This is just a generic database connection that I have there, and there is no username and password specified, which means it prompts you. So it says credentials required. So you have to type something in. You can say, yeah, that's data level access control, but it's not really, how to put this, useful, because I don't want to run this every single time I use it. Now, for everything that's file-based, so Excel, CSV, the file set, so the data set, object access means data access. You have access to the object, you have access to all the data in there, period. There is no distinction. You can't control anything more detailed in a file-based access. You would have to load it into an actual data set that's in a database somewhere, and then you could start playing around. For everything else, and you will see everything else is quite long, the answer is really, it depends. you have to come back and check, because this is what we have in the current release as connection possibilities towards data sources. And there's A, a lot, and B, very, 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 very different ones. And if we just go in and pick out some of them, you have Oracle applications, and here you say, well, we actually have some very cool options here. We can use the credentials that we provide here, or we can require the user to enter their credentials or use the active user credentials. This is very cool, but it doesn't exist, for example, for a Spark database. It doesn't even exist for an Oracle database. We can't use these options here, but we can use it for an Essbase database. And for an Oracle Service Cloud, again, it's just hard-coded username and password. So these data connections, these sources, have different things supported depending on the source, depending on how advanced the development is, etc., etc. So for everything that's data level access control in the new data visualization components, honestly, go and check every single one of them, because we have to do it as well. With 5.6 around the corner, there are some changes in there. I can already tell you that. So now these were basically the overview of all the security concepts that are in there, that you can, all the knobs that you can twist, all the possibilities that you have to influence the SQL. We didn't go into much detail because basically then it would be a half-week workshop if we said, okay, this is how the SQL gets impacted by that or this. And I actually quickly, whoops, yeah, we have like 4 minutes of handover time. Jenny, how does the Q&A channel look?
Fully empty.
Empty? All right. I saw some pop-ups during the presentation because, oh no, there was the chat. There was all the chat. Okay, cool. Well, if the Q&A is empty for the moment, then I would say I hand over to Becky, or let's say I stop sharing and Becky starts sharing.
All right, let's see if I can do this. And it started on the very first slide. Give me a second. We're going to go super fast through these, and then I'll share my screen. Sorry, got to get through 60 slides. Everybody go take your quick coffee break. I will be starting in just a minute.
Christian, take care of the question then.
Yeah, I'm just going through the chat. By the way, sorry for saying over here and pointing at stuff, because that's something I actually didn't realize. Zoom doesn't show where your mouse pointer is, so I can't actually point out things with my mouse, it seems. So if that was confusing, I apologize.
Look at the questions, please.
Oh, Q&A as well. What's your view on EBS integration in OAC? Adrian, seriously. How to put this? Painful? Because the problem is one of the key ingredients in that integration is reading stuff from a database table, and sadly, as of 5.5, this has been put on the deprecated list or about to die list, which I was quite nastily vocal online about. Yeah, I have no clue how they want to do it in OAC, unless it's hidden behind the Oracle Applications integration. It is definitely not what you were used to in 12c. I only had a couple of cursory tests where I used OAS in OCI, so where I still have full control, where I still have the possibility to actually write a BI/SQL group provider. And there it still worked because it's 5.5. Now we have no idea what that deprecated means in terms of time frame, whether it's in 5.6, whether it's in 5.7, and I'm talking OAS, not OAC. So we can't really say this right now, but at the moment, works in OAS. In OAC, you should try the Oracle Applications Connector. But wait, so Adrian just posted something in the chat. Thanks, Christian. We informed by Oracle it can't be done. So I have to stick with OAS till it can, or we move off EBS. Yeah, that's basically it. That's basically it. It's a nightmare at the moment. It's a very sad situation for EBS customers out there who want to go to a rather, let's say, non-managed or Oracle managed OAC rather than having to do stuff themselves in OAS, well, in their own data center or in OCI. Sad but true.
It'll be that way for the other, like PeopleSoft and JD Edwards too.
Yeah, that's yeah. That's the reason why we're screaming about the drop-off BI-SQL group provider and the drop-off of using session variables, etc., etc. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, Becky, I'll leave it all to you.
We've got another question. One more before I start.
Oh, one more. Oh, what's your view on Oracle's stance of yeah? What's your view on Oracle's stance of deprecating session variables, and how will this affect OBIEE security that makes use of these variables? Well, I think it's a very how explicit can I be in this talk? No, it's really a dumb decision. It's really a dumb decision. It's been taken without any regard for any existing project. Unless they say, okay, here's a one-to-one replacement and here's how you use it, I say, for crying out loud, keep it. Because literally in about 20 years, I have yet to see a single solution that does not use this. Everybody uses it all the time, all over the place, because that's the whole point of it. And yeah, if they kick us out and Oracle BI security will be basically neutered. If we can't do this anymore, about 40% of our possibilities are out because we can't do it dynamic anymore. Everything that I showed in business model filtering, in LTS filtering, everything will be gone. And they can't do that. That's my opinion, period. They can't do it. All right.
You're so optimistic. Okay.
Hope dies last.
So we will switch over to talking about how all of this works now with OAC and IDCS added to the mix. I appreciate your questions, and what we'll do here, I'll try to run through this in a fairly quick manner. IDCS, when you log in and you switch over from your dashboard or my services and you switch over to IDCS, this is what it looks like. You have users set up, you have groups, your applications will be here. What we are concerned with, or what we're going to be managing, are the users and groups. Now, Christian had alluded to earlier that the groups are going away. That's how it is worded in the front end. It's not going to be called groups in OAC, but you absolutely in IDCS are going to create users and groups, and you can sync those with your LDAP or other identity managers. Now, if you're setting this up yourself manually, I'm going to walk you through how you set up a group, because you really shouldn't be managing by user. You should assign users to groups, and the groups will then be assigned to application roles in OAC, which we'll show you. So when you go to groups, you click add new group, you give it a name, and you add your users that you're going to assign to the group. And that is it. It's fairly straightforward. It's manual. You're going to have to assign it. Now, what you need to then do is go log in to your Oracle Analytics Cloud, and you're going to click on users and roles. Now from there, you're going to see the same users that were set up in IDCS. You're going to click over to application roles, and you have your default application roles here. And if you were setting this up for the first time, you're going to, you can use the out-of-the-box default groups, but what I recommend is setting up your own groups, application roles, or get the terms mixed up. You're going to set up your own application roles, and then you're going to apply these default out of the box application roles to your application role. To tie this to something like your Active Directory groups, when you set up your groups in IDCS, you're then going to manage and create a new application role. Like I said, make your own. Don't use the out of the box, because then if you make changes to those, you can cause a lot of havoc downstream. So if you create your own custom application role, then you can manage it. You can manage the members, and you can manage the application roles. So I'm going to show you how you manage the members. And when you manage the members and you search by application roles or roles, when you drop this box down here, it's going to, roles equal IDCS groups. So when you're looking at this and it looks terribly funny, and all of these things are the default groups that are coming from IDCS. So you'll scroll through here, because there will be a lot of them by default, and you'll find that one that you created, and you'll select it and add it. So you're taking your groups from IDCS and you're adding them to your application role that you created. Now, you can also manage the application roles, and like I said, you can use the default ones to apply the correct access that you want to use for your custom application role that you just created. And so if you'll remember way back on one of the early slides, we showed that the application roles can be recursive. You can add application roles to application roles. But how does IDCS tie to Oracle Analytics application roles? The groups from IDCS will be applied to an application role in OAC. So that's how IDCS is tied. So you won't be able to access WebLogic. You won't be able to manage it in the way that you've been managing it before. You're going to have to learn the IDCS system and how it ties to OAC. So this is where you do that. So whenever you create a group or import a group into IDCS, you then come into OAC and apply it to an application role that you have here. Okay, so when I said that IDCS groups show up over here in OAC in a section that's called roles, these roles are incredibly ugly. So when you scroll through here, there's going to be several, especially if you have more than one OAC instance, it's going to have duplicates of all of these things. This is really ugly, and you don't want to really mess in this area. So what you do is you go to the application roles and manage everything from the application roles tab. Okay, so what we'll do real quick is a deep dive into how you set up Active Directory Federation and single sign-on with OAC. And what you will do if you have a very large setup, you're not going to want to manage and create 100 different groups or more, and then come into OAC and apply 100 different groups to 100 different application roles. And so when you have all of the corporate groups already set up, you can pull those and sync those into IDCS with the connection to Active Directory. And so I'm going to talk to you about how you actually do that. So let me show you the background for the first time I did this. I've done it a couple more times since then. I was working with a global financial services firm. Of course, because they're in finance, security for them was the highest priority. And they had been wanting to move to Oracle Cloud for quite a while, but they waited for OAC to be available to do Active Directory integration. And that wasn't until February. February of 2018, I think, is when that first became available. The other thing that they wanted to do was have everything behind their own network segments. And so this was OAC Classic. When we set this up, we set up a VPN to their Palo Alto firewalls and set up private IP ranges so they could only have access from within their corporate network. We did set up OAC with IDCS, and we were migrating them from OBIEE 11G to OAC. Now, you'll notice that we absolutely could not manage the security manually because they had 8,000 users, and then there was a merger in the middle, and then we ended up around 9,000 users before the project was done. And they had 14,000 groups. Yes, more groups than users. So single sign-on was also highly desirable, and that was kind of a monkey wrench thrown in about halfway through when we were doing this. So the very first piece that you have to do is build a bridge. There's an Active Directory bridge that will sync all of the users and groups up to IDCS. This is the piece that was the most important to get because there's no way we can create 8,000 users and 14,000 groups. There's just no way. Now, the bridge itself has had a lot of growing that it's done over the last year and a half. The very first few versions of it were very clunky, but it's much better now. But let me tell you a little bit about how you set it up and some of the gotchas that we had. So because you're syncing from Active Directory up to IDCS for this case, you must install the bridge on a server that's joined to Active Directory. I know that sounds kind of obvious when you say it, but when you're dealing with OAC and you're dealing with OCI, you're working in Oracle's cloud, by default, those servers that you're on are not connected to the corporate Active Directory domain. So you have to go find someone who can install this agent on an Active Directory domain server. And then you have to go through security and they have to vet the install, all of these things with a big security group. So once we do install it, we have to install it with a user that has rights, one, to install the software, but also a user that has rights to query the Active Directory, LDAP. So it has to be able to at least read all users and groups and any OUs that are applied. If you are trying to set up an Active Directory user specifically for this bridge, the bare minimum permissions are found on Oracle's docs. And then if you want to follow along with the tutorial, I have slide decks that have a video where I'm actually walking through this, which will be available at the end of these slides, so you can actually watch the video and follow along. But if you wanted to do this, there's a tutorial that walks you through this as well. And so the steps for that, there's a download an exe from IDCS, you install it on a domain joined server, you configure that once it's installed, which users and groups you want. Now, when you have 8,000 users and 14,000 groups, the tree for Active Directory is very long and you can drill in, and it's just like a file or folder system you have to drill in. What we found, at least when we first did this, is that when you check a box at the higher OU level, it does not check the folders underneath. So you had to expand and check the box all the way down the tree. I think that was fixed, but when we did that, it was the most obvious and confusing thing that took me forever to figure out, because I was like, I'm clicking the OUs, but I'm getting no users. It was one of those funny gotchas. Once you have that configured, you do import that into IDCS. And when you have 8,000 users and 14,000 groups, that takes a long time. And they had a limit on the number of syncs that could happen in a single session. So we had to run it every 5 minutes, and it took us almost 2 weeks to get it completely synced up. That was the first version. After the second or third version, that 500 limit was gone. Then obviously you log into IDCS and you verify that all the users and groups that you expect are there. So this bridge becomes a service on that Active Directory domain when joined Windows server. So when the server goes down for patching and gets restarted, this bridge starts back up automatically. What's really funny is that it's undocumented on where the default install path for the config utility lives. So when you find it, put it in Notepad, because every once in a while you have to go out there and there's no documentation on Oracle's part that showed you where that lives. So you have to go find that. Same for logs. Once you open the utility, there's a little button at the top. You click on View Logs. Make sure you also pay attention to where the logs are living. We set that up in SolarWinds to do alerts if it stopped logging, because it was a very funny thing. The agent would show up. It would show that it's fine and syncing fine in IDCS and on the agent. And the only way we knew it stopped working was because there were no more logs. So we set up the logs to send alerts when it stopped logging. So that was something that we had to do as a gotcha. Okay, so now we have all the users and groups in IDCS. And you could stop there, because you could go then and tie those groups to the application roles that you have in OAC. But what we wanted to do was single sign-on. And single sign-on required a lot of different work. So in order to do single sign-on, you had to pass a token from Active Directory to Oracle. And so you set up what's called SAML 2.0 for Active Directory Federated Services. So what is SAML? In order to allow someone to just be on their computer and use Oracle Analytics without having to log into Oracle Analytics separately, the user will access the app. The app will then ask and send a request to Active Directory. Active Directory will say, yes, this is a valid user, or no, it's not, and pass that on to the application. And then the application will say, okay, user, you can access Oracle Analytics. So in a nutshell, a single sign-on is passing authentication. It's passing that not from Oracle, but to Active Directory. And so to set that up in the back end, there was quite a bit of work. So the steps of that, if you follow along this tutorial will help you walk through the steps for single sign-on. Yes, Jackie Chan. The steps for setting up a connection to Active Directory Federated Services, you have to download a metadata file from Active Directory Federated Services, and then you also have to download the file from IDCS, and you have to exchange them in order to make the two talk together. So when you download the file from Active Directory, the really interesting thing is that when you're with a company that has 4 different versions of Active Directory Federated Services, you have to figure out which type of file. We went through 3 or 4 files before we got the right version. But if you tell them that it is SAML 2.0, they can make a file that's backwards compatible. If by default they go and just click and export this metadata file, it's going to, if they're on server 2016 or newer, that file is going to be in the wrong format, because OAC cannot read anything newer. So we had to have them make a file that's for an older version, essentially. For the IDCS side of things in Oracle Cloud, you have to add the URL, the SAML URL. You're going to upload the file that comes from Active Directory. You have to set up the claims, and the claims, so And there's a whole backstory to this. In order for us to make this work, the users that were logging into Windows were logging in with a network login. My network login for them was WAGNE-B, Wagner B. And so we could not get the SAM account name to be the claim for many tries. So we had to switch over to email address. Email address worked. And so we had to set up the claims to match in order for when Oracle went to ask Active Directory, is this valid? We had to go by email address. So we're passing the email address over to Active Directory. Active Directory says, yes, this is a valid person and they are logged in. They can log into Analytics Cloud. Now, when you follow the tutorial and when you follow IDCS, when you click to download the IDCS metadata, remember there's two pieces of metadata you have to share. The IDCS metadata by default doesn't work for Active Directory. You have to specifically add at the end ADFS mode equal true. And that's not documented on the tutorial and it's not documented on the walkthrough, but if you go to support, they do have this as an option. But if you're using specifically Microsoft Active Directory instead of some other LDAP, you have to specifically say ADFS mode true, because then the XML file goes in a different format that that Active Directory would recognize. So Oracle plays in an older version and Active Directory is like, got a special export the file in a different way. And then the file from Oracle has to be specifically done differently for Microsoft Active Directory. So apparently neither one uses the standard format. Okay, so the next steps for that should be step 3 and 4, but apparently on a new slide I forgot to change the numbers. In the console, you have to import the metadata from Active Directory. You set the claim rules. Like I said, you set email address as the incoming and outgoing claim. And then you assign the new ADFS inside of the Active Directory policies. Again, the tutorial walks you through it. I have a video that walks you through it. If you want to follow along, I have done that with actually an Azure Active Directory federated service. So at the end of the slides, I'll have a link. You can go watch a video too. I would do a live demo, but that takes forever and it would never work because they always fail. Okay, so finally, there was one last ask. When I was setting all of this up, we got all of the users and groups synced. We got single sign-on to work, but then they wanted it to be a direct single sign-on instead of a login screen that you clicked a button. They didn't want to have to click the link or click the button. So in order to set up direct single sign-on, so where you go to the URL and you just get your home screen, you never hit a login prompt. There's a support document out there from Oracle that talks you through that. But essentially, you go into the IDCS IDP policies and you remove the default provider and you create a new one that assigns ADFS to that and the Oracle application. And you have to give it a redirect URL, which is funny because it doesn't matter. You can put Google, you can put Oracle, you can put Amazon, you can put Microsoft, it doesn't matter because that redirect URL is never actually used. But you have to put something in there and this will allow you to use a different policy instead of the default policy. And that then doesn't have a login screen. You get to skip the login screen and go straight to Oracle Analytics homepage. Now, some of the things that we ran into when we were doing this. I think I've mentioned most of these as we went along, but with the bridge, the logs would just stop logging. The agent would still show running both in IDCS, in the Oracle Cloud, and it would show running in Windows, but it was not doing anything. So we also found the path for the logs. It's not in any of the documentation, but once you have it, make note of it. We were basically parsing the logs, and whenever it stopped running, then we would send an alert and we would have a script that would restart the bridge. And then, like I said, when checking the OUs, make sure you expand them and check the lower folder objects, because it wasn't being checked by default. And then the biggest issue that we ran into, and I'll talk about in just a second, was that we could not use the same account name as a username when we were doing the Active Directory. We ended up having to use email. And so that caused some interesting things when we were migrating. Active Directory uses SAML 2.0, and the default Windows Server 2016 format was SAML 3.0, so we had to have them revert it to an earlier version. And then, like I said, the download metadata from Oracle, from IDCS, wasn't in a format that Windows would recognize, so you have to actually enter the URL to get that download in the right form. Security wanted users to only be able to log in if they are authenticating through Active Directory. And the problem with that is, for Oracle Classic, is that when you access Enterprise Manager or WebLogic Console or the RPD admin tool, it was not using the Active Directory federated service. It had to have a local user. So we had to create some users still in IDCS manually, and we couldn't use Active Directory. We did have to configure a second IDP policy. That policy would allow you to skip the login screen. It would sign in directly. Oh, and we did have one other gotcha, that when you signed out of Oracle Analytics Cloud on the DV or the analytics side, it would always go to the sign-in screen. But because we had set up single sign-on, it signed you in. So you never could sign out. You would sign out, and then it would sign you back in automatically. And that, when I was done with the project, was still an outstanding issue. So you could never actually log out. It would auto sign you back in. Okay, so let me talk about the biggest thing that we had to fight around. So when you migrate from OBIEE on-prem to Oracle Cloud, the Oracle Cloud users needed email addresses. Obviously, most often, the My folders for a user on-prem wasn't using email address. It was using a name like Wagner B. So my folder from on-prem was not available to me when I migrated to the cloud. So what we had to do on-prem was run this script in order to rename the user folders, in order to migrate the user folders up to the cloud and people still have access to them. And so thank you for Christian 2 years ago for helping me with the script. Okay, so just to recap, it was migrating from OBIEE on-prem to OAC. It was very security sensitive, and they wanted to have private IPs. So at that point, I think still you have to use OAC Classic in order to pull that off. They wanted Active Directory and single sign-on integration. And so to do that, first you have to do an Active Directory bridge that loads users and groups from an Active Directory domain server. Find your logs, that's really important for that bridge. Then for single sign-on itself, you use SAML 2.0, you find your friends that are in the Active Directory group on the server admins, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with them making this work. Claim rules, when we set it up, only worked with email. I still to this day feel like there should have been a way to make that work with SAM account name, but I never could get it to work with anything but email. And then you can have the login screen actually not even pop up. You can have it remove the login chooser page, and The one caveat to that was that you still needed a local login to be able to use like the RPD admin tool. And then I do have a link down here. We did not set it up this way before my project was done, but you could set up high availability agents. So if one server or one agent went down, but you still needed to keep that sync happening between Active Directory and IDCS, you could set it up in Docker and you could have multiple Active Directory bridges. So if you felt like getting super fancy, you can follow that link too. Okay, so I talked about videos. If you wanted to watch YouTube videos of me walking through each of these steps, I've recorded them. You can find that deck here. I have a blog that talks about setting up all of the labs that I used, because not only did I do this for the client, I also set up Azure ADFS, and I set up essentially labs that you could do this yourself if you followed along. The tutorials I followed for the bridge and for the single sign-on are on Oracle's website. These are really good tutorials. Of course, the email is the only option that is shown when you set up claim rules. And last but not least, if you wanted to not have a login page at all, if you wanted to get rid of that, there's a document that walks you through that too. Okay, so that's our deep dive into setting up single sign-on and Active Directory. We can definitely take questions. I have not checked time. Oh, we definitely have time for you guys to do questions if you have them.
They all just died.
I know. Well, 2 hours first thing in the morning for the US is a little much for this much security.
Oh, they've been locked out by security. Aha. Zoom Security 101. Oh, wait, there was
Zombies.
Zombie lockdown. Yeah, we haven't had zombies yet. We're still missing zombies, meteors, alien invasion.
I feel like you're just jinxing us. Like I'm waiting for the meteor to come through my window.
Well, one did pass us about 3 million kilometers away last week.
Yeah, I heard about that. There's supposed to be a new comet too.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, here I thought I was like, I wasn't keeping track of the time and I just zoomed through that.
Whoa, Wayne. Okay, Wayne has a good one.
That's good.
Wayne asks, do you think Oracle will allow BI admin access to my folders? Well, no. Exactly, no. No, and that's actually, you know, since we have the time, it's actually a very, very interesting topic, because I was obviously doing things I'm not supposed to do, and hacking around in the database tables that are now containing the security of and the whole web catalog. And so what Wayne is talking about is that the personal folders of users are actually not accessible to BI administrator or anybody except for the user, which can be quite of a pain when you try to migrate things, when you try to troubleshoot things that are inside their folder, etc., etc. So we had the possibility to hack around with that in the, well, current on-premises versions, including OBIEE 12.2.1.4, because it was a file system. We could take an offline copy, we could hack around, we could hack the Gibson, so to speak, and modify the ATR files, etc., etc. Now it's in a database table, which
you don't have access.
Well, which you're not even supposed to know where it is or what it contains or how it's structured. And I can tell you, Wayne, it's a huge pain. It's a huge pain to get that thing to work again the way it did.
And we should ask, Obviously, user folders are supposed to be only available to the user by default. There are occasions when we need to move them or make changes to them. As an admin,
Yeah,
obviously,
exactly.
we always fight with that. What would you need the access for as the BI admin? If the user leaves the company.
User leaves the company, yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
Honestly,
should we go back to the
well, there's two more
script?
questions, but just quickly to yeah, that's actually something that you can't
do in
modify
OAC.
as easily.
Yeah.
Well, officially you can't. But for Wayne's question, you know, user leaves the company or needs to move department. Now, what I used as a kind of workaround for that is something else that has been put on the deprecated list, lovely, and that's the act as functionality. So you basically give act as access to that account to an admin, and you say full control, not just read, but full control, and then you can modify and move around any object that you want. So act as basically is your last saving grace there in 5.5 and forward. But since ACT-AS has been deprecated and the catalog is in the database, your options are getting quite slim.
You want to answer Sarah's question as that ties real nicely
will OAS
into
or
that?
Cloud version have any changes to impersonating feature? So impersonation, except for ACT-AS. Anyway, the old school impersonate over URL that's out since 12c, and the ACT-AS is definitely still there. Yes, it's deprecated. Yes, they say they're going to kill it. But again, like all the other things that they said is deprecated. I mean, there were 2 or 3, well, no, there were I think 6 points in total, and 2 were where I went, yeah, okay, I kind of can see that working, but with getting rid of ACT-AS, getting rid of session variables, getting rid of BI SQL group providers, just no, huge no.
The answer, I think, is to say that it says that it's deprecated. By default, it's off, but you can turn that back on. Yes. You can definitely turn that back on and it's still available. And when I ask those types of questions to product managers, they say they're not going to completely get rid of it until they have a replacement for you. Yeah. Yes, whether, whenever that happens, but until then, we still have that option on OAS and OAC.
Yeah, and Joel asked the follow-up question. So how does offline mode of the catalog manager now work in OAS now that the catalog is stored in the DB? What's a nice way of saying it doesn't? It doesn't? It doesn't.
It doesn't.
Forget it.
You can do online mode.
Yeah, that's it.
But you have to have, you know, the admin role in order to be able to log in, just like you do with the RPD admin tool. But you can still use the catalog manager. Yeah,
exactly.
Online, and, not offline.
Yeah, online.
Online.
Exactly. And I haven't yet found a way of well,
saving it offline.
Actually, what you can do is you can connect online. You can create an archive file that you then put like on your file system, and then you can work. Or as Johnny just said, snapshot catalog on disk done. Yes, that's what I'm just saying, Johnny. You can physicalize it with a catalog extract or with a snapshot. It's just that if I do a catalog extract, it's just a catalog. With a snapshot, well, you're also not allowed to, or actually not supposed to dig around in that snapshot. You know that. You're not supposed to do that. But yeah, you can kind of work around it.
So what we're talking about is when you go into the console and you make a snapshot and you download it, you can unzip it. In theory, you can technically unzip it. Now you can technically read into Oracle's documentation, it says you're not allowed to do that, but you can still do that, and then you can access it offline if you want.
Yeah,
so the stuff that you can do in offline mode is not available because it's read-only.
Yes. That said, old catalog managers can still read new catalogs. And if you create .catalog archives, you can still work on those as well. The good thing is, at the moment, we have pretty much we have functional parity between OAS, so on-premises server, and OAC cloud version, and OAS gives you the ability to actually dig around in those things. So you can move stuff from OAC to OAS and then fiddle with it. Or you can take a snapshot of your OAC and fiddle with it on your desktop. That being said, no, you're not supposed to do this. No, it's not supported. But I get where you're coming from, definitely. Joel had another one there for you.
Yeah, let me answer that one. The claim rules that I worked with in order to get single sign-on to work, the claim rules only worked with email. We tried Active Directory user ID, which is also called SAM account ID, S-A-M-A account, account name. That should work. It should work. Everything technically from that perspective, as far as I can tell, it should work. We couldn't get it to work. We could only get it to work with email. And I don't know if that's because of Active Directory or because of Oracle. I would guess that the way that the user is set up in Oracle, the email is the uniqueness, not the user ID. And so we could only make it work with the email. When we did the sync, we had to make the user ID in Oracle the email address, and then make the email address as the claim. Technically, it should have worked. We couldn't get it to work. And the other 2 times I've done it since then, I've just done it as email and used that script to change the folder names. And users don't care at that point once single sign-on is set up, because they don't have to type their email. That's happening automatically.
And that's the thing that I've seen with so many security topics that you know, through you do upgrades, you move from on-premises to cloud, etc., etc. You do upgrades, and most of the security issues that were encountered, honestly, we could only work around and solve due to the multitude of tools that were available, due to the whole scripting, due to changing things offline, to getting it back in, etc., etc. And it's very dangerous to take these things away, especially, as you said, you know, thousands of users, more than 10,000 groups. That's it's something that, you know, you shouldn't sacrifice functionality on the altar of simplicity. Never, never. Yes, make things easier, but don't take things away. Don't take things away. Just leave them there. Give something like a simplified interface or so on the side. But what's there, leave it there. What works should still work. We need these things. We didn't invent these requirements out of the blue because we felt like it. It's actually the clients need it like this. They don't want to spend 5 weeks and tens of thousands of dollars on reworking their whole security just because an option was dropped. They will rather say, well,
yes, so we don't need to use this product. Yeah, no, that's...
Yeah, exactly. I guess we can switch now. I guess it's an incentive to go to somebody else. Yeah, worst case scenario, but yeah. So officially we have now a break until 1500 when Abby and Chris are going to start. So we're still going to be here. I think Becky has something that she needs to run to. Right?
Yeah, I'm doing training in 15 minutes, so
all right. So
I have to run.
Yeah, Becky will do her training. Thanks so much, Becky, for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for getting up so early, especially.
This is fine. It was my pleasure. Okay, I'm going to stop
All right,
sharing.
take care.
If you want to take over the screen, I'll mute myself.